At 16:30, a Ukrainian MiG-29 is observed over the skies of Donetsk. It was destined towards an important target. This target was the Russian supply dam in Mirivka. The pilot flew low, within 150 meters of the ground to stay hidden so far. But still, this would all turn within a few minutes. The mission was not simply another labor strike, but also a strategic risk. The strategy was timed and intelligently maneuvered to fully focus on the mission. Little did the pilot know that his 3 Russian radar systems had already tracked him down. The long-range radar on S-400 had picked him up 38 kilometers away. In the meantime, a Tur M2 missile system was tracking him in the south, and a Buk M3 was on the east, all prepared to do so. The next move made by the pilot had to matter, but he was not yet totally exposed. The bottom valley provided a small protection, and the hills were a natural radar blocker. Nevertheless, it was a bet with time. The MiG would take off the valley in only 8 minutes, and the flat agricultural land to the front would not provide any protection. The pilot was aware that after opening up on the terrain, there would be no cover. He was aiming at a dam at Mirivka, which is one of the main components of the Russian logistics network, and Ukrainian civilian drivers were transporting the supplies to the enemy blindly. There could be no hesitation. Now he needed to attack or lose his chance. The MiG had a speed of 880 kilometers per hour following the Nepro River valley, using the natural depression in the terrain to mask his approach. It was just 150 meters above the ground. As long as he stayed in the valley, the surrounding hills blocked him from radar. Through the HUD, the terrain rushed past at 236 meters per second. Power lines appeared and vanished faster than conscious thought could process. The pilot was flying on instinct and muscle memory, his hands making corrections before his brain registered the need. This wasn't flying, it was controlled. Falling with style, but avoiding becoming one with the Ukrainian countryside was the least of his concerns at this moment. The SPO-15 radar system in the MiG began glowing with warnings upon its screen and flashing in all directions like a GPS, unable to resolve its mind. Every pulse indicated the point at which the danger originated, but not its distance. It was as if someone was yelling at you, but you do not know whether he or she is actually behind you or he or she is in the other room. The pilot heard the beeps, and in his brain, he was counting the distance as a lightning and thunder do. The northeastern S-400 was sweeping sluggishly along its radar like a half-wakening person. 3 beeps indicated he was 60 kilometers away, and he was only searching around. 2 beeps indicated 40 kilometers interest awakening. And 1 beep, it was 20 kilometers, probably already aimed at him. MiG was currently receiving a good 2.5 Mississippi of attention. He was not near enough to make him panic, but was near enough to make him think fast. Every calculation was synchronized and planned. It remained low for 8 more minutes. The decision made by the pilot was done in a moment, and his mind was reasoning out the available options. Meanwhile, his hammer bomb, fastened midline, was performing diagnostics at 5-second intervals. Its GPS position fixed on 12 satellites, its inertial navigation system fixed, and the rocket motor set to blow. It was now working all right. It was only whether one survived and how soon. The bomb required particular conditions to reach the target, conditions the pilot didn't have at 150 meters altitude, but thinking about that now was like worrying about dessert while your house was on fire. First, survive the approach. Then figure out how to deliver a €250,000 weapon with a Soviet jet that predated the internet. He glanced at the fuel gauge. It showed 2,400 kilograms of fuel left. Home was a 142-kilometer round trip, and at this speed and altitude, it would not be long. The engines that were fitted into the MiG were also thirsty, particularly in low altitude, and all the maneuvering would do nothing but use more fuel. He had a full 18 minutes of air travel when his fuel supplies were depleted, but that was minutes which could be lost in a flash in case of an emergency. It was not just that the MiG was up against the clock. The actual difficulty was to control the radar systems of the enemy. The RD-33 engines were guzzling fuel at low altitude, burning through it faster than a freshman at a college party. One long, evasive move could drain his entire reserve. He had 8 kilometers left to clear the valley. 8 kilometers of relative safety before entering what pilots bluntly call the shooting gallery. The drone feed showed nothing shifting at the dam, no vehicles, no inbound helicopter, no fighter scrambling yet. He eased the throttles forward, pushing up to 880 kilometers per hour. Every second he gained now was a second he could spend on the target, or one less spent under fire. In combat aviation, both count as wins. Exactly at 16:38 hours, the pilot reached the valley and found out what radar coverage actually meant. The SPO-15 had a radar warning mechanism which had ceased to produce slow beeps and burst into a sudden array of signals. 6 different emitters suddenly spiked in intensity. This meant that the MiG was no longer in a safe zone, but in a high danger zone. It was no longer hidden. The radar of the S-400 that had been casually searching in the direction of the aircraft locked in on the MiG with pinpoint accuracy. The beeps, which had been quiet, now burst into a constant and pressing note, a note which all pilots recognize as an omen that they are within seconds of a missile attack. The radar warning system on the MiG, which resembles the radar detector on a car, could tell the intensity and frequency of the radar pulses, and this enabled the pilot to determine how close the danger was. The MiG was inside the range of the missile at 38 kilometers, but the pilot was aware that it was not too late. The Russian operators required at least 8 seconds to fire upon the target. The pilot must have done something within this time frame, and he must have done it quickly. The MiG turned in a knife-edge turn in a heartbeat. It was a calculated move that was fast to break the radar lock. The pilot changed his flight path to such a drastic extent that he virtually cleared the radar of being able to track him. The most important was the Doppler effect. Radars identify the movement by examining the frequency of the signal coming back, and by changing his course across the radar beam, the pilot decreased the Doppler effect to 0, so that the MiG was invisible as part of the landscape below. The step unlocked the door, but it was a sacrifice. The pilot had spent precious time losing speed, and now he was flying towards the wrong direction, an action that exposed him to danger. When he evened over, a new danger was born. The Tor M2 missile system, which was 8 kilometers south of them, suddenly appeared on the radar screen. The Tor M2 used command guidance as contrasted to the S-400, which used its own radar to target the target. This implied that the direction of the missile was being managed by the operator of a ground radar and transmitted to the missile at the time interval of 0.1 seconds. Jamming was almost impossible because the missile was not dependent on its own radar to target the aircraft. Being aware of the difficulty of the situation, the pilot made another quick, evasive maneuver. He shot down 150 meters and only 50 meters above the earth, passing through the treetops. Now the MiG could be flying in place where each tree and each rock and each power line were life and death. He promptly flipped on the countermeasures panel, which threw chaff to jam the enemy radars. Chaff is small collections of aluminum-coated fibers, which would cause the radar reading to be very big and impressive, except the Tor was not working at the frequency that was best bounced back by the chaff. The pilot flicked to another dispenser in a split second, and chaff that was specifically tuned to the frequency of the Tor was released. The radar could now hardly follow the MiG and was continually losing the aircraft amid the false returns produced by the chaff. The pilot wasn't finished yet. One additional flick of the switch made him turn on the ECM, Electronic Countermeasures pod. This pod generated fake returns in the radar display, faking the location of the MiG and distracting the radar. The radar operators were now following a ghost in the machine, a decoy, and the actual MiG was escaping into the scene of confusion. It was a brilliant move, though, at a heavy cost. The MiG was flying an inch above death, half 100 meters above the ground. A single lapse of attention would plunge it onto the rock. The pilot was aware that every decision had such great weight given the fact that the target was only 8 kilometers away. The mission was at its critical point, and time was running out. The MiG was flying through the skies, and the fuel gauge was still falling. It was not only the evasion of missiles, but a calculated attack and a home delivery. The pilot needed to make a risky decision. He was aware of the dangers, but the mission was not about being on the safe side. It was the matter of establishing the type of commotion that could keep him alive. In case the systems of the enemy were flooded with contradictory information, they could not concentrate on getting the MiG down. It was a gamble, and in fighting, disorder was the surest defense. The pilot made a step that would subject both him and the MiG-29 to their limits at 1640. He threw the afterburners into full blast and the jet shot upwards, the engines throbbing into action that vibrated the whole plane. The MiG had disappeared before anyone saw it, but in an instant it was a flashing streak in the sky, a burning streak that would have been noticed by all the radars over a mile. It was a daring step to cease concealing himself in the ground, but to come squarely into the range of the radar. He became a shadow and then a target. The radar operators who had followed him were now locked on, and their systems were recalculating the position of the jet in real time. Within a few seconds, they had to determine the way to intercept him as he scrambled up. This was where the destiny of the MiG was to rest on all the actions taken during this time. The climb was brutal. The G-forces struck him with a wave, hurling him further into his seat. His body was as though being squeezed and his sight began to blur, and his head and chest pressure grew stronger. The mind of the pilot ran within itself to be focused. He was required to maintain control of the plane even though the pressure was great. He was at the verge at 4 Gs, and beyond that, he would start losing consciousness. However, at the moment, there was no time to think about it. He must continue climbing, continue pushing on, however difficult it was. In the meantime, the radar planes were tracking him on every side. The S-400 to the northeast, the Buck M3 to the east, and the Tour M2 to the south were all following him wherever he turned. His radar alarm system was ringing in his ears, and with every beep, he was reminded that time was lapsing. The MiG was directly becoming a target of various missile systems. Had he remained on this path, the missiles would have been zeroed on him. Therefore, the pilot ended up doing something out of the ordinary. He turned the MiG into an inverted spiral climb, what pilots referred to as barrel roll. It was untidy, erratic, and was by no means textbook, but that was the idea. He kept reversing direction, and the missiles could not keep up. He left them wondering instead of providing them with an easy way out. His movements were now visible to the radars like a snake, winding up a staircase and making twists and turns in every direction. The intercept points of the missiles were predicted with each roll and were continuously changing as the MiG wound through the air. With every angle, the radar operators had to recalculate it. To the pilot, it was instinct. He was not even thinking of technicalities. It was simply survival. He landed the plane once or twice on 5,000 meters as the MiG was climbing. The firearms machinery sprang, and he understood that it was his opportunity. He had purchased enough time to drop the bomb, the one element of this operation which might decide whether it would succeed or not. Nevertheless, he was not safe even when he was about to launch the payload. The radars were still following him, and the warning signals were screaming in his ears. The missiles were yet nearer. He was in a very dangerous situation, with 3 distinct missile systems on target, but he remained calm. It was the time he was trained, the time when all the moves, all the decisions, will be united into a single action. The plane was level, and the pilot pressed the button, and the bomb dropped. He didn't hesitate. Second guessing was impossible. The gun was now discharged and was headed directly at its mark, and the pilot was ready to turn aside and flee. When the MiG-29 had reached 5,000 meters altitude, the pilot had a minute to calm down. Now the bomb was out of the air and flying down on the target. But there was no time to relax. The conflict was not easy, and so was the danger. The radar warning system continued to be firing at him, screaming at him that he was not out of the woods yet. The missiles were already airborne, and the time of impact was counting down, both of the weapon and the pilot. The S-400, Buck M3, and the Tour M2 continued trailing him behind. The missile defense systems were evolving as rapidly as possible, but the MiG was still maneuvering erratically and changing the angles in an unpredictable manner. The mind of the pilot was rotating, computing each action, each fraction of a second. The bomb was now a course of its own, but the greatest challenge was still to get away. As the MiG flew along, the pilot had a fuel gauge flashing a red warning. The afterburners had already consumed a fair deal of fuel, and there was no evasive action he could make which would not narrow his error margin. He had to complete a job. Yet, home was a long way. The bomb was about to hit its target, but there was inadequate time to waste on distractions. A single misstep and his mission, as well as his escape, might be under threat. The pilot made a very important decision just as the MiG fell to 100 meters above the ground. He plunged, weaving the plane over the land, with the natural lines of the land formations protecting him against the missile fire, which was still following him. It was a last effort, a desperate, yet calculated effort to buy himself time. This weapon was continuing. It was gaining ground, rushing at a melting speed toward the target, its infrared sensor sweeping the ground below. The MiG, on its part, was circling round like an aircraft attempting to free itself out of invisible grip. The engines made a glow in the sky, and the pilot was in the hope that the ground features would conceal him till the approaching danger had passed away. Next, within a moment, the MiG flew off, even with the treetops. His heart was racing. The bomb was almost on its final plunge and was soon to fall. The target had been locked on by the infrared seeker. The dam was just seconds short of knowing that it has been identified as one to be destroyed. The pilot would view the bomb via the HUD, which was dropping at a high rate, and the seeker would be able to ascertain the target at pinpoint accuracy. The MiG was flying very low on the ground. He could hear the engine pounding beneath him, and it was always a reminder to him that he was not safe yet. All the time was about accuracy and the quickly dwindling fuel. The dam was drawn nearer by the bomb, which now was in its last plunge. The thermal signature of the concrete was being watched by the infrared seeker. Warm sunshine having made the water cooler, and the concrete hotter than the water, it was therefore noticeable. MiG had cleared the way and no danger was to any civilian. This was not a strike, but a surgical operation to have minimal casualties in the process of accomplishing the objective. The bomb approach timer was running out. The fuel supply of the MiG was nearly exhausted, yet the pilot had a clear mind. He was attentive and was observing the dam increasing in his eyes until the moment when the bomb would hit its target. The last few seconds went by and he held his breath. Then the bomb exploded with a death rattle crash. The intensity of the strike made it appear that the time had stopped. The wave of the explosion shook the dam, and the explosion was heard in the ears of the MiG. The pilot did not even see what had happened. He squeezed the throttle lever and landed on the ground, where he used the landscape to conceal his escape. It was all over, and the way home would still demand all the talent which remained in him. The MiG started on its way back home, using the remaining fuel. The pilot had accomplished his mission, and now he was concerned about getting back. The sky, which had been his deadly minefield of radar firing and missile attacks, was his last obstacle, but the hardest part was over. It was successful, and when he diverted the plane back to home, he also could not avoid a feeling of silent relief. You now know the facts, but strategy is always open to interpretation. Subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdowns and share your perspective in the comments. Faced with 3 coordinated air defense systems, the pilot had to rely on his instincts, reflexes, and calculated risk-taking. Do you believe that, despite AI and automation, the ultimate arbiter of aerial warfare will always be the pilot's composure? Because the analysis doesn't end with this video, it begins with you.